Welcome back to this episode of Bearcat Chats as we highlight virtual working environments. And we are joined by two assistant professors in the School of Management, Joey Tsai and Cindy Maupin. To you both, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having us. We look forward to our conversation today.
Thank you.
And the two of you, we couldn't have found two more qualified people. I mean, your experience is extensive way before the pandemic hit in terms of leadership and studying organizational environments. To simplify it, let's sort of look towards the future first. And starting with you, Joey, where are things heading in terms of how organizations are going to operate moving forward? Are we going to see at home permanently? Are we going to see workers have more flexibility? What does that look like?
I feel like right now, given the situations, we don't really have a lot of chance to work face to face. So in that sense, from an organizational perspective, we probably need more, make things more virtual. So we're going to use a lot of virtual tools to facilitate a lot of team, which is also Cindy's expertise. Like she also knows a lot how multi-teams can actually working together. So from my research area, I see the virtual tool is going to be applied to widely to the whole organizational settings right now. And there's a lot of chance you probably have to work virtually outside your area, outside your countries, a lot through the virtual tools. For example, right now we're using Zoom, right?
Mm-hmm. And Cindy, some people say, I hope I never go into an office again. And understandably, especially for people with families where there's that flexibility. I know other people that say, I am dying to get back to my office. So, what are the pros and cons? What's sort of the mindset now in the corporate world going forward?
Sure. So one of the challenges is that it's hard to generalize across people, right? So there are going to definitely be some people who have no problem working in a home environment. In fact, we've seen a lot of workers who are even more productive whenever they're working at home as opposed to in the office. But then you also have those other workers who, again, they're maybe more extroverted and they are dying for that social interaction. They love the opportunity for casual conversation while grabbing coffee or water, walking by someone's desk. And so I think a lot of this is going to depend on some people's individual differences with what their preferences are, but then also maybe what types of home environments they're working in. So of course, the office itself is going to be a bit more standardized. Chances are your experience in the office will be the same as your coworker across the hallway to some degree. But for people at home, that's a completely different story. Some people might have pets who, interrupt their Zoom calls. I myself have experienced that wonderful thing. There's also people who have small children or maybe elderly family members that they're caring for. And so the experience of someone who is working in a home environment where it's just them or maybe a few other people is going to be vastly different than those who are working in a home environment with a ton of distractions, a lot of additional people around. So I think that workplaces in general are going to have to start weighing and considering each person's unique sort of backgrounds there to be able to determine what's going to work best for each employee moving forward.
Joey, it's interesting because, again, there's sort of two sides of the coin here. When I'll use the dog interrupting as an example, that humanized, looking at it from the worker's perspective, let's say, that humanized
Right.
their colleagues and maybe a supervisor in a way that never would have happened in person. But I think it's also concerning those casual conversations can be the gateway to finding out about opportunities, whether when you're talking in the coffee room, and now people really don't seem like they want to hang around for the small talk on Zoom. When it's over, it's over.
Yeah, totally agree with your observations on that. And what we observed so far, especially from a lot of things has to be done by virtual tools. There actually happens to a lot of conflicts happens, and the conflict itself cannot really be solved by simultaneously because we have limited informations, right? And also a lot of time we cannot really connect together on the same page. So the conflict issue actually is probably the most important things when we use the virtual tools. And it happens to a lot of people right now, actually. So you actually have to spend more time to deal with all the conflicts or the just because we don't really have enough social information, as you mentioned.
Following off of what Joey said too, one of the major challenges is that because there's not this informal environment, people at the beginning of a call are rarely chit-chatting nowadays, just because rather than the conversation being between two people, suddenly it's between 20 or 100, depending on the size of the meeting. And it makes it a lot more challenging to form those informal social bonds. But it also, like Joey mentioned, makes it challenging to resolve any problems with team functioning too, right? It becomes a much more formalized process where you have to confront maybe everybody at the same time, or you have to create specific one-on-one meetings with every single person on your team to address the conflict. And that can be really challenging, as opposed to just being able to address something quickly before, after a meeting, maybe pulling someone aside. All of those things that we used to do normally in person are just an additional level of planning and again, formality nowadays. And so on one hand, there's the beneficial aspects of, informalizing the dog interruptions, or, the small child wandering into the background, right? Those things to some degree make it seem like things are less formal. But then when it comes to managing team processes with other people, again, you don't have those informal opportunities for conversation in particular. So everything's got to be planned out, which sometimes might make conflict seem that much more intimidating to address, right? In that case, maybe people just say, oh, everything's fine, we're not going to talk about it.
Or it
And try
exacerbates it, right? We could have solved this by just peeking my head into someone's office and just saying, can you send this, or let's take care of it this way? And now you've got 5 people on an email chain.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. And so now it's kind of like everybody's involved in everyone else's business when it comes to that, as opposed to having those one-on-one opportunities. And so again, there's these constant, pros and cons that we're all balancing and trying to relearn these new norms as we're in a virtual environment, as opposed to, just popping your head in someone's office as you walk down the hallway. It's definitely a new challenge that I think people are trying to adapt to quickly.
And those first impressions are so fragile. So if I'm learning from someone in person, okay, I'm getting to read their body language. I can make a judgment of, how I feel about them as a colleague. But if it's just through email, Joey, that can come across sometimes unintentionally very cold and
Yeah,
to the point, which might be that person just trying to be efficient.
totally agree with that. Because the email wise is very limited. We got limited information about this person, right? And that's the reason we right now in our, let's say, Facebook messengers, we put a lot of emojis, right?
Yeah.
Those emoji itself actually can convey some kind of information about emotions, right? Or how happy you are, or how sad you are, right? Those are also very important to the communications.
Absolutely. And kind of building off of that, it's interesting thinking about the body language aspect when we're in these virtual sorts of environments. I'm doing it now. I talk with my hands, which means you might see me randomly gesturing to something that nobody else sees in the room, right? Because it's just me in here. But then at the same time, I've also noticed, particularly in meetings with people where there's maybe, 10, 20 types of people, it becomes more challenging to do just a simple like head nod to show agreement, or a smile, because that movement isn't big enough to be able to see in the little tiny boxes that you see from the Zoom window with everyone's faces. So instead, I see people really exaggerating some body language that in person would potentially look silly, right? So a lot of times people, to show agreement, will do like a really big thumbs up. But yeah, exactly, Joey. But that's the type of thing that in a normal, face-to-face meeting, if you're in a conference room, or if you're in some sort of larger meeting space, it would be kind of strange for us to see everybody just immediately putting their thumbs up. But that's because it's so much easier to see the simple head nods, smiles, and so forth, versus now we have to really over exaggerate our body language to make sure that our tone is coming across in the right way, or that we're quickly communicating how we're feeling about a particular proposition. So it's been an interesting thing to watch that evolve over time too.
And for students, taking it from their perspective, whether they're applying for an internship or entering the workforce, I think the onboarding process or just getting acclimated is one of the toughest things these days because, again, I'm never meeting that person. I probably didn't even do my interview in person. So, Cindy, how do students acclimate themselves at an internship or a workforce where developing those relationships at the outset is so crucial?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I actually got to give a talk recently to a group of scholars in the School of Management about this topic specifically. So I'm glad you asked. But one of the, again, the major challenges that without those informal conversations in the hallway, getting water, grabbing coffee, and so forth, it becomes a much more intentional job for people who are joining an organization to kind of go out of their way to try to form bonds with other people. And so I think one of the best ways to be able to try to break into that space and help yourself get acclimated at a new organization is going to be through trying to find some sort of liaison or mentor who can introduce you to the norms of that group, but then also physically or virtually introduce you to different people that might be a good match for you based on either what your job characteristics are, your personality, and so forth. And I think that the kind of mentorship or liaison angle is something we've frequently relied on without really thinking about it in person. Now I think it just has to be much more intentional. So if you are an organization on the other side that's hiring new people, making sure that you don't just hire people and leave them to fend for themselves either, right? You want to make sure you're matching them with people who can kind of guide them through the process, who can introduce them to others so that they can start to build their own new professional social network at that organization.
Final thoughts from both of you as we wrap things up. What's the biggest key, both from a worker and from a corporation standpoint, that you see going forward, starting with you, Cindy?
Sure. So I think one of the most important things right now and also moving forward is being adaptable because again, we never quite know, what next month is going to hold, what next year is going to hold. So being prepared for a variety of different physical environments, a variety of different social types of challenges, and also maybe new challenges and problems that your organization is facing that we never thought would happen pre-pandemic days. All of that is going to be really critical for people to remain themselves successful in their organization, but also to help their organizations continue to be profitable into kind of the next frontier of business. And then I think another important aspect here, particularly on behalf of leaders and when working with other people, is being empathetic towards what others' experiences are. So some of us, may be thriving in a virtual environment, and that's great, but also some of us might be really struggling. And so not trying to treat every employee with the same lens, but really thinking about each person as an individual and what their strengths might be, but also being cognizant of what their challenges might be, particularly as a leader or even as a fellow teammate. You want to make sure that you're being sensitive to those types of issues, being flexible with people and being understanding. Because at the end of the day, we are still human, right? We're all going to have things that we struggle with. So the people who do a great job of making people feel valued still, even in the very stressful and challenging times that we're a part of currently, that's where people are going to feel a deeper sense of connection and a deeper sense of commitment and ultimately be able to perform better. So as long as you're both flexible and empathetic, I think people will be well set up to be successful moving forward.
This is like really tough time for everybody, but it's also a good time for yourself to get along with your own self, right? So it's kind of a good time to evaluate yourself to see what do you really like, how can you help others in terms of virtually, right? Virtually probably is probably the best way to handle those things, and also like it's probably a lot of chance we're going to have a lot of conflict, a lot of disagreements. So just be patient to deal with those and be more like understand about others' perspectives. So those kind of experiences or exercise will enhance yourself, your ability to become a better leader.
Well, I could, we could do 2 hours, or I could. Maybe you guys want to leave on this. But Joey Tsai and Cindy Maupin, keep up the great work. Excited to read the research that you guys have coming out, and really appreciate the time.
Thanks so much, Jacob. It was a pleasure being here, and I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Thank you so much, Jacob.